Canada and Japan. Gareth Wheeler, is this their biggest test with everything that's happened off the field, the change of staff, Mauro Biello's picking a slightly different team, and Japan's unbelievable run of form? Is this Canada's biggest test since the World Cup?
I'm going to say no, because it's a friendly. Friendlies are friendlies. Like, playing in a Nations League final against the United States, that's been the biggest test in recent vintage. Is this the best team that they played against? Probably. But we'll see what Japan actually does, because in the build to the World Cup, when these two teams played, they didn't necessarily play their best 11 in that game. And friendlies tend to work out that way. It's a little bit more experimental in danger. In terms of teams coming into this in form, Japan is just playing incredibly good football right now. 4 goals against Turkey, 4 goals against Germany, which ended up costing Hansi Flick his job as German national team manager. 4 goals against Peru and 6 goals against El Salvador. This team has players who are scattered across Europe playing very good football right now. They play together. They have an identity. They're quick. They're technical. It's going to be a very difficult game for Canada, but one that they're going to relish as well. Really, with a new manager, potentially some new players being able to come in, I think it's going to be the type of game that they're going to relish. You can test yourself against a much different team, a very good team as well, and a camp where I think the pressure's off. Like a new coaching staff, they might relish the fact that there's some new voices in the room. So we'll see. So that's why I just think the stakes are so different from what they kind of did in the Nations League in the summer that I can't really compare, but they're playing a really quality opponent in what should be a really watchable game of football.
You rightfully mentioned some new voices there. I'd be remiss to not congratulate Karmasako, who is one of the best footballing minds in Toronto, and so many people has come through him as a coach or an assistant coach over his career. I think it was really, really cool to see. It's very well deserved. I thought it was worth a shout out. Oliver Platt, I turn the ball over to you. I know the stakes aren't high, but do you think it's their biggest test?
I think Will's assessment was fair. I think, it's hard to match a competitive game and a final and the pressure and intensity that's around that. But Japan are the best team they've played since the World Cup, and comparable to some of the teams they played at the World Cup for me. Like, this is one of the national teams, on the biggest rise in world football right now, not just in terms of the results that Will's mentioned, but what their players are doing as well. Mitoma has been phenomenal, obviously, this season for Brighton. Endo's gone to Liverpool. Ito is a player playing in France who I really like, kind of an out-and-out traditional winger. Kubo in La Liga is having a fantastic start to the season. So there's all these rising stars in this Japan team that make it a real test for Canada. You just don't really know exactly what you're going to get from the Canadians, having not played in September, under a new coach, couple of key players missing. It's going to be a really interesting one away from home against Japan. So definitely, the kind of test that I think this team needs more frequently, and they're certainly going to get it in this match against Japan.
To dampen the mood maybe a little bit, Oli, I'm going to ask you about a level of concern here, because David and Lairn haven't been in their best form, admittedly, and Tajon Buchanan is not with the team. So when you think about the product and what Canada might be able to offer this really good Japanese team like you've outlined, what is your level of concern with the absence and the form of those two players?
I'm not worried about Johnny David. He's going to be fine. Players go through ups and downs in terms of their form, particularly strikers and their goal scoring output. I just think he's a top player who will figure it out and come through it. The others, I think the position as a whole, you have to say it's not as deep as you would have hoped a year ago, 2 years ago, when you were looking at the player pool. Lucas Cavallini, not really in the picture right now, probably kind of past his prime years in the Canada jersey. Ike Ugbo hasn't really been the player that I think a lot of people were hoping when he committed to Canada. And Kyle Larin, you're just in this situation where, to his credit, his club form hasn't always impacted his international form, and he's quite often delivered with Canada. But you just don't know what you're going to get from him in terms of the form that he is in coming into each camp. He has a tough time at Besiktas, goes out on loan, comes back to Turkey and is excellent, goes to Belgium permanently, has a nightmare there, goes to La Liga and is fantastic. And it's like 2 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, going up and down. And now he's in a situation again where he's had a tougher start to the season and hasn't really hit it off at his new club. and is in one of those lull periods again. So particularly with Tajon Buchanan out of the squads, it's not as deep a group, I think, as you would have liked to think, particularly if Davies is going to play wing back more permanently. I don't think there's the quality of options that they'd like to have, and it's probably going to be something that the new coach is going to have to reestablish a little bit.
But that's okay for me because players are going to have to step up, and there's a chance in future, and we'll see who the new, permanent manager of this team is, and whether they can pull a Jebison or a Koleosho into the team. Then all of a sudden, those concerns about maybe losing a little bit of depth up front, they simply go away. Not worried about Kyle Aaron at all. He scores for Canada. He just does. What he did from January, and I tried to articulate this at the time, it was not natural going to a club in a better division and scoring the way that he did last campaign. It just never was completely sustainable for me because that's not what players do when they go to a new club. The fact that he's gone to a new club and found it a little bit difficult right now doesn't surprise me whatsoever. This is typical for players. There's growing pains when you go to a new club. And when you have two strikers like that for Canada who work their socks off from a defensive perspective as well, not just attack, I think that's critical. What's going to be important for Mauro Biello here is that they don't use all their legs simply just defending the entire game, that they have a little bit of extra in the attacking third. And that's where Canada have really kind of lacked over the last little bit. Just their finishing hasn't been top. And I think that what Biello needs to do in this window is add another player in the midfield, maybe not press so relentlessly, and make sure that those two players up top have a little bit more legs. But look, let's be honest about what Canada does have. They have a lot of really good quality. They have a central midfield that's playing competitive games in the Champions League, and Stephen Eustachio. They have the best left back in the world in Alphonso Davies, another Champions League right back in Alistair Johnston. There's some really good players in this Canada team. So let's not forget what they're bringing to the table and how competitive they are. There's a reason why Japan is paying Canada to go play a game like this, because they want the game, because Canada are really good now. It's the exact same reason why South Korea and Saudi Arabia wanted to play them in the previous window. And if the ball wasn't dropped, they would have been playing them. It's because Canada have something to bring to the table. This Canada team is good. They're good to watch. There's star players in the team. So let's just not diminish or discount what Canada is bringing to this game because, they're a very, very watchable team. So let's see how they come together under a new head coach and see what tweaks are made. And perhaps they find something else that brings out even more quality in the team.
That's a very salient point, so I wanted to let it breathe before I gave Oli some slander for coming after my Cardiff City Bluebirds, because Ike Ugobo slander will not be tolerated on this program for the amount of times I let you get away talking about MK Dons. Cardiff City is 2 points
He played for us as well
in the championship.
Brief words about MK Dons. I'm
Join
sure
the club,
remembers that.
There's room right there for you in the club.
I like him as a player. I don't think he's had a terrible start to the season. I just don't think he's kind of been the impacts player for Canada that's going to compete with David and Laren playing the levels they're playing at. But I would prefer to see, along the lines of what Will said, put an extra midfielder in and let Kone go.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want like-for-like replacements up front if you are missing players.
That's the one area, Oli, and you pointed it out when the squad was announced, a lot more midfield players. They need to get that midfield right. They've been far too light in that area. A lot of attention is being put on the center backs or the defenders. I think they're okay in that area. There's some decent young players that are coming through. It's the midfield that Biello needs to get right for them to be competitive in games like this.
Mm-hmm. Gareth, what time do you have to be at the studio on Friday?
I don't know. It's not the Friday morning that's the problem. It's the late night Wednesday for CPL, and then Thursday is not going to be a normal day right into that. So I've just told my family and friends I'm a write off for October. I'll see you in November, and then we can go party at that time.
That's a very good point. 6 a.m. Eastern time is when the ball will be kicked. The Samurai Blue and the Canadians cannot wait for that one. Hope you'll join us on One Soccer.